Hey everyone, welcome to Magic the Gathering for advanced players. Should Veil of Summer be banned in Standard? Uh, Good question, Matt. No, a lot of people think Oko should be banned. I'm not going to go over why that's the case. Obviously, that card should be banned. It's stupid. It's undercosted. It's too high loyalty. It blanks text boxes. That's for a different video. That's for Magic the Gathering for novice players, perhaps. But for advanced players, we're thinking about what would I ban if I was going to ban stuff. Would it just be that? What are the other problematic cards? What's contributing to the climate we have right now? Where there's only one deck, a one deck format, the nightmare, really. Veil of Summer is one of those cards that does contribute to that. And I think it probably would be on my ban list as well. I saw some back and forth on Twitter earlier today about, well, they usually don't ban just random cards like Color Hose. They usually ban the aggressive threats. And while that's usually true, I think we ought to discuss, what's the case for banning Veil of Summer, and is that a case that's reasonable? So let's go through a couple arguments in favor. These aren't the only arguments out there. Clearly, banning a card should be a high bar. You shouldn't just ban a card because it's slightly too good. The question is Veil of Summer way too good in a way that should be banned? Here are the arguments that it is. One, just on raw power level. So if you think about the rate you're getting, draw a card for 1 green and counter a spell. Protect your stuff. It can even be used in other contexts, right? You can counter the switch ability of Oko or the abrupt decay ability of Vraska, stuff like that. For 1 mana, you can counter 6 mana spells. You can counter 7 mana spells. You can counter 2 mana removal. You can counter 2 mana discard. There's so much flexibility. From a raw power level perspective, this effect ought to cost more than 1 green and potentially substantially more, or do something substantially more narrow. So from a raw power, this card is just way too aggressively costed. It does too much for 1 green. At a bare minimum, we should be deciding whether we want to hose the counterspell side of the reactive spectrum or the discard side, or be paying a little bit more to counter both, getting it all for 1 green. And the argument that, well, typically hosers like this don't get hit, it's if you look at the ban list, there's stuff like Emrakul and Stoneforge Mystic and that sort of stuff in Standard. That's all true, but that's kind of a reflection of the fact that they didn't print these cards at that power level. But any card could be printed at this power level. You could, lands could be banned. It doesn't mean you look at Forest and go, well, traditionally Forest wasn't banned, therefore this new land. It's no, you got to look at what the card is, how powered is it. And I think the argument that, well, traditionally hosers weren't strong enough to get banned, it's a weird card to ban. That's like saying, well, we're not going to ban the fox from the hen house because, most things in the hen house historically have been pretty, non-violent. They get along with each other for the most part and everything's fine. Well, yeah, but when an exception shows up, whether it's the wolf, or whether it's the Veil of Summer, you got to look at the exception. And here the power level is just, it's off by a lot. 2, think about the ecosystem effects, meaning, when anyone's designing kind of a metagame, whether it's the folks at Wizards or if you're creating a casual format, whatever the case may be, you're thinking about there's aggressive decks, there's control, there's reactive decks, there are threats, there are answers, and this creates an ecosystem where there's a balance among these things. Maybe combos in the mix, perhaps, to kind of punish some of the mid-range strategies that are just focused on, creature removal and sticky threats or something like that. Okay, a combo deck might throw that off. That all creates an ecosystem where it's not just about finding the single most efficient undercosted threat and sticking that thing out there. Well, Veil of Summer disrupts that ecosystem by preventing a lot of the decks that would otherwise be presenting answers and punishing people for going just too all in on, let's say, the most efficient threat like an Oko. Punishing those folks becomes really, really difficult if Veil of Summer exists in the same color as those answers, but even setting that aside, it has an ecosystem effect. So if it was really costly to put Veil of Summer in your deck, then it might just shift the ecosystem, shift those dynamics, create a different ecosystem around that, where there were different trade-offs being made. So now maybe like a burn strategy was punishing this other whole dynamic. It turns out Veil of Summer is so flexible and so strong that it kind of just takes those most reactive decks out of the metagame. The aggressive decks or the threat-heavy decks themselves can then focus on beating other threat-heavy decks and aggressive decks, so then aggressive decks get squeezed out. And so you have this kind of effect where things get really unhealthy. And obviously now we're at a one deck format. But even if you didn't have Oko in there, Veil of Summer might be excluding decks that you wanted and effects that you wanted. Now on the other end, I mean, some of this stuff, just Thoughtseize type of effects oftentimes have that same effect that Veil of Summer is having, right? So when Thoughtseize was in standard, it had a similar effect where it kind of narrowed the range. So this is fighting back against that. Of course, there's a little bit of chicken and egg going on here, but let's look at the effect that, again, going back to number one, the power level of this effect is so strong, it's having a really warping effect, and there hasn't been a stable ecosystem emerging, and even with Oko gone, I think you'd have to be concerned about the effect this card is having with some of those really powerful threats that would remain. 3, the player experience. This is not the card power level in the abstract, but specifically, I mean, some of the stuff that players would otherwise want to really be doing in an environment where the Planeswalkers are so powerful, whether it's Oko or Nissa, or Vraska, or little Teferi. In that kind of environment, I mean, players would be going towards stuff like Murderous Rider, stuff like Agent of Treachery, if you're a slower deck, to try to get back in it. Well, having 1 green counter those spells draws, and you get to counter both halves of Murderous Rider, that player experience is so negative with some of these cards, especially the newer Murderous Rider, that, it's pretty troublesome. Again, there's always a flip side of the coin. Flip side of the coin here, Murderous Rider itself is a pretty aggressively costed card. I mean, should that thing be allowed to run free without Veil of Summer keeping it in check? I mean, perhaps not. Obviously, it would be better if Veil of Summer was a little bit more narrowly crafted, but hopefully folks can find a way to answer Murderous Rider. It does have a life loss effect as part of it. It doesn't hit artifacts. There's things that Murderous Rider can't do and things that it's limited by. I'd like to see that get a chance to kind of show itself without Veil of Summer. And Murderous Rider right now is often paired with the color green, so those decks have used Veil of Summer as well. So even the Murderous Rider deck itself will get weakened a little bit against blue strategies. Now all of a sudden, you can negate Murderous Rider and not worry that your negate is getting 2-for-1 by Veil. So these things all kind of interact. The power level of it, the ecosystem effects, the player experience. And so if you look at how all these things interact, I think that's really the case, that Veil of Summer is a big, not just a small part of the problem, but a big part of the problem. And that if the goal of your ban is to get things back to a healthy ecosystem with people having a good experience and there's a diversity of strategies being deployed, I think Veil of Summer might have to get the boot alongside Oko. So I look forward to hearing what you think about that. If you like this type of content, Magic the Gathering for advanced players, subscribe to the channel. When hit the little bell when I post a new video, you'll get an alert. Either way, I appreciate the support.